The gifts of the gods. Listen, children, and listen well, for I have a tale that I would tell, a tale of skill the dwarves do possess, and Loki's boast of who can make the best. Loki's boast that nearly cost him his head, for carefully with the dwarves one must tread. So listen now, and listen well. Thor, Odin's son, got married. He married the beautiful goddess Sif, of the long, golden, flowing hair. It was a huge ceremony. All the gods attended, and the feasting was fit of the gods themselves. Their favorite drink, a honey drink for adults called mead, flowed freely. Well, of course, Loki attended this huge event, but this time he was uncharacteristically silent. You see, not that long ago, Sif had been with him, and they had been talking about marriage. Of course, Loki was happy for his best friend, but he was worried too. He didn't think he could trust Sif not to break Thor's heart like she had his. Loki sat, and he drank, and he sat, and he drank some more, and an idea came to him. Sif's long, gold hair had to go. Yes, he thought to himself, that was usually for those who did worse than just break someone's heart, but, well, he thought she deserved it. And it was Sif's one vanity, her one treasure, so he knew the idea was perfect. But when? Clearly tonight would never do, even if he was too good a friend to Thor to ruin his night. He knew Thor and his new bride wouldn't be separated. So he'd need to bide his time and wait his chance, as much as he hated the idea of waiting everyone to know just who Sif truly was. But, he promised to himself, they would see one day. And Loki always kept his promises, in his own way. Luckily for him, Loki didn't have to wait long before opportunity arose. Barely 7 days passed before Thor was itching to go killing giants. While Loki was normally all for joining in, if nothing else for the amusement of watching Thor get thrown around for the fun of it before taking the giant down, today he pled a headache and watched. It wasn't entirely an untruth. His headache was merely golden-haired. So when she went down to the river to play and swim a while, he was free to follow. And when she fell asleep on the bank, long golden hair spread around her to dry, he was waiting with sharpened knives. Swish, snick, and it was done, without her even waking up. When Thor got back, he was in high spirits thinking of his new bride. He couldn't wait to see how she reacted to his tale of bravery against this giant. But when he walked in the door of his grand hall and saw her waiting, he froze. Sif stood there, glowering, her beautiful golden hair now a golden mess sticking up around her ears. Thor stared. Then he couldn't help it. He started laughing. Huge, booming laughs. He couldn't stop even when she picked up the nearest chair and threw it at him. After a while, though, he became contrite. Yes, even Thor could feel sorry. And he saw how upset she really was. She wouldn't calm down, even when he said he still loved her, and she was still beautiful, and hair was just hair after all. It'd grow back. But nothing he said worked, and finally he began to grow angry that someone had upset his lovely bride that much. He vowed to track down whomever it was, and he knew just where to start. The same place he could start any time something went wrong. Loki. The door slammed open and Thor burst into Loki's hall. Loki jumped, dropping the book he was reading, then saw who it was and smirked before he could help it. Thor saw the smirk and arched an eyebrow at Loki, then boomed, "I knew it was you! You vile, disgusting rat! I thought we were friends!" The smirk wiped off Loki's face. Thor, we are!" Lightning flashed in Thor's eyes, a stormy gray, red hair lifting around him slightly. "Friends don't do that to friends. Give me one reason I shouldn't mop the hall with your face, or give your hair to Sif." Loki couldn't help it. "Oh, she wouldn't want my hair. Red just isn't Sif's color." Thor glared and thunder cracked as he took a step towards Loki, who winced. Okay, sorry, friend. Loki paused. Thor stopped and nodded. "I know what you two were, and how hurt you were. But I thought you were over it, or I'd never have married her." Loki made a face. "I thought I was too, but Thor, I don't want to see you hurt like I was, and, well, I just... Thor nodded. You thought everyone should see her as you do, didn't you? Loki nodded sheepishly. Thor pointed at Loki. You are going to make it up to her, aren't you? It wasn't a question. Loki glared. What? She should be making it up to me. Loki, Thor said, you have had your revenge. Now make it right. Loki sighed. Fine. Thor glowered. Loki? What? I said fine. Thor was not deceived. You will, or I vow I'll break every bone in your conniving, which means someone who's always scheming up bad things, body. Loki grumbled, and he glowered, but he agreed. But just how was he going to make it right? And then he remembered. The dwarves. The short, dark elves with long beards who lived underground in their caverns. The dwarves who, once, in Loki's hearing, had vowed that they could make anything at all. And they did owe him one, he recalled. That business last time he tried to go giant hunting with Thor, and they had mocked him. It was only natural he'd mock them back, but they did owe him for that. So, off to see the dwarves Loki went, muttering about Thor and his threats, to be sure, but he went. The dwarves were not best pleased to see Loki, quite unreasonably, Loki figured, and it took Loki quite a bit more effort to talk them into it than he usually needed to talk someone into something. But in the end, he'd stung their pride, and they had all but fought each other to make Sif's new hair, pulling those magnificent beards at each other and yelling loudly enough to make the mountains rumble. But that wasn't all, Loki chuckled to himself. He'd even got them to make a ship and a spear, because when Loki said he'd only needed the absolute best, 2 of them had stepped up. The sons of Ivaldi, if Loki remembered right, and they immediately began arguing. So he'd proposed a challenge. He would see who could make the best item. Of course, he'd ensure that Ivaldi himself made Sif's gorgeous new hair, while his 2 sons outdid each other arguing. Eventually, they'd settled on making a ship for the one and a spear for the other. Each ordinary-sounding items, and Loki would have had doubts. But from the sounds of this ship and spear, they would be something to behold. And while he paid good coin for the hair, the ship and the spear would cost him nothing. They were, the dwarves said, gifts to prove their ability. So when he returned to pick them up, he was not disappointed in the least. The hair was glowing softly in the lights the dwarves hung on the cave walls, a soft, pure gold, and he was assured that the dwarves' magic would enable this hair to grow as if it were real hair. So, he reasoned, Thor and Sif should be quite happy, and he judged that would make it right with Thor. But when he saw the ship and the spear, his jaw dropped. The ship, fully as large as any you would imagine, was called Skithblathnir, and it was so cleverly designed that it could fold up and fit in your pocket. What's more, the dwarf broker had granted it magic. It would always find a wind to move it. An awesome item indeed. And when he saw the spear, he knew immediately Odin must have it. It was called Gungnir, which meant swaying, and it was a thing of beauty. Its tip, sharp as a razor blade, gleamed softly of the same gold as Sif's hair, and it was etched all over with runes, beautiful magical carvings and writing. These runes granted it an awesome power. It granted the one holding it the ability to never miss a throw and always hit what it was thrown at. Well, Loki felt very smug indeed, knowing these were treasures he'd walked away with. But it was too easy. He wondered what else he could get the dwarves to make, through their desire to compete and prove themselves the best. Their pride. He hummed, thinking, and finally approached the other dwarven craftsmen. And Loki said, These are very nice, these gifts the sons of Ivaldi have made. But I'm sure master craftsmen of your quality could make better. Or are you afraid? Unequal to the challenge, perhaps? The dwarves glared, but none dared take the challenge up. But Loki kept taunting until finally 3 dwarves actually threatened to take his head for those words. But Loki, thinking quickly, turned it around. Fine, it's a wager. If you can beat these gifts, You may take my head." For Loki felt very confident they would never be able to beat such fine gifts as he now held. It was impossible. But they agreed quickly, and even proposed that the other Asgardians act as judges, and their look of joy when Brokkr, Atri, and Sindri accepted the wager made Loki rather uneasy. So, as Brokkr and Atri and Sindri turned back and went to work, now with Brokkr working at the bellows, which you must blow into, fast and deep, as he was doing so with skill indeed, when Loki turned himself into a fly and bit Brokkr. To Loki's dismay, however, Brokkr merely grunted and continued blowing and working the bellows, and Sindri drew out a magnificent golden ring, which he called Draupnir, or Dripper. This ring, too, was magic. Every 9 nights, from it fell 8 beautiful golden rings, just like it. Now it was Sindri's turn at the bellows. He told Brokkr to be especially careful to make no mistakes. So, Loki, very worried now, bit Brokkr right in the eye. Blood flowed, blocking Brokkr's sight, and he stalled ever so slightly to wipe it away. But quickly, Brokkr resumed forging, and finally, he drew out a huge hammer. Loki the fly grinned to himself, seeing the flaw. Its handle was a bit short. Brokkr had almost ruined the piece. Surely Loki was in no danger of losing his head after all. But now Atri took his turn at forging, while Sindri worked the bellows, and Loki the fly bit Sindri's hand. But to Loki's horror, Sindri didn't even feel the bite. Then Loki bit him on the neck, and he didn't seem to notice that either. A third time he bit him, but Sindri just grunted and produced a massive golden boar, a pig so magnificent light poured forth from it in the dim cavern. Sindri grunted in satisfaction. This boar will run faster than any horse, and can go through water or the air itself, unlike any other horse, he said, and Loki was no longer so sure he would keep his head at all. But the other Aesir would judge. Loki flew away, turned back into his own normal red-haired form, and gathered up the spear, Sif's hair, and the ship, and then he returned to Asgard, the dwarves already on their way. When the dwarves arrived, they feasted in Odin's great hall, and then Loki announced that he had a challenge. He had some gifts, he said, and their guests, so recently arrived, had also brought gifts. But of course, Loki said, the question was, whose gifts would be the nicer? To Sif he presented her new golden hair, and Thor's look as she lit up was answer enough. He'd made that right, at least, even if he was to lose his head. To Odin, Loki gave the spear, Gungnir, and Odin's pleasure as such a fine weapon gave Loki hope he'd win after all. To Freyr, Loki gave the incredible little ship, and Freyr was truly awed by such an impressive gift. Loki gloated, surely he would win. But then it was the dwarves' turn. To Thor they gave the hammer Mjolnir. Who better? Thor's fierce joy in the new hammer, which came back to its owner when thrown, made Loki's heart sink. Then they gave Odin the ring Draupnir, and Odin was amazed by its beauty, and even more so when he learned how it would make more every ninth night. Loki's heart rose again, but then they gave the boar Gullinbursti to Freyr, but Loki was sure he had still won. That ship alone was incredible. Then Odin stood up, and he told them all that the dwarves, their guests, were the winner. Loki's face fell. Loki was sure Odin was just being polite to the dwarves, because they were guests and had brought gifts. But still, Loki was in trouble now. Brokkr, Atri, and Sindri began walking towards Loki, their axes and knives in their hands, and Odin stood up again. "What is this? What goes on here?" he said, deep voice booming through the hall. "Loki!" Loki turned sheepishly to Odin. I may have made a minor wager, Allfather," he said. Before he could continue, Brokkr interrupted. "Indeed, Odin, he has made a wager. He bet us his head if we made the better gifts." Odin's sigh and Thor's massive palms smacking into his forehead were clearly audible in the now silent hall. Finally, Odin spoke. Indeed, and why would you do such a thing? Loki smirked. Well, you see, it was this way. He explained about the first set of gifts to make it up to Thor, and how it had gone so well, he decided to get the dwarves to make more. So, Loki concluded, you see, since they're both my own doing, and both sets of gifts can, in fact, be attributed to me, my head is not, in fact, lost. The dwarves glowered and turned to Odin. The terms were clear, All-Father. Odin decided that maybe Loki needed to learn a lesson, and besides, he was curious how the quick-witted Jotun who was his sworn brother would get out of this one. Agreed. Loki, you must pay the wager. The look on Loki's face was priceless. Green eyes wide, he stared at Odin in shock, the wordsmith, for once, without words. Then Loki saw the amusement in Odin's own gray eyes, for he still had two then, and that's another tale, and narrowed his own. I see how it is then. He nodded, and Odin laughed. Odin knew Loki would get even, eventually, but this was going to be so worth it. Loki, thinking fast, turned to the dwarves. Indeed, it seems my head is yours. But I fear I must apologize. The three dwarves looked confused, and Loki continued. You see, I promised you my head, but not to my deepest shame, my neck. Seems I did not include that one detail, so my neck remains untouchable. Broker spoke. But how can we take your head without harming your neck? Loki winced as if in pain. Ah, so you see the trouble. A small thing, you see, but there it is. Broker looked at Odin. Oh, Father, a moment, if you please. We must talk. Odin nodded, granting the dwarves their moment to talk. When they returned, Broker approached Odin and whispered something in his ear. Odin's laughter boomed through the hall. A fitting punishment indeed, friend Broker. It is granted, and I'd like to see him talk his way out of that one. Broker smiled. Then, if we may request assistance, Allfather? Odin nodded. Thor, Freyr, seize Loki and put him on that table. Loki's face, already pale, lost all color. But to his credit, he stood and even approached the table, where Thor and Freyr grabbed him and pushed him down on the table, holding Loki down on it. Broker approached Loki, whose green eyes remained on him. Well, seems to me we were tricked and lied to. I hereby dub you, Loki, Liesmith. Loki's eyes narrowed. I've been called worse. Broker turned to Frigga, graceful and elegant, the wife of Odin. Lady, may I beg a favor? Frigga was curious. Of course, dwarf. What may I do for you? The dwarf smiled coldly. May I borrow some thread from the Norns, those who weave the threads of our lives, and a needle, please? Frigga laughed. Oh, of course. And she went to get the thread from the Norns herself and a needle from her own collection. She then handed them to Broker, who looked down at Loki, now silent. Well, Liesmith, here then is what we won. Rather than take your head, I will so shut those lying lips, so that you may tell lies no more. Loki's eyes widened, and he protested. When exactly did I lie? I told no lies, dwarf. Broker's eyes narrowed. Hush! You twist words like others twisted this thread. Be quiet now. And with that, Freyr and Thor holding Loki at Odin's orders, Broki sewed Loki's lips shut. Being threads of fate, Loki's lips were sewn a long time indeed, and some say he bears the scars to this day. Some call him Scarlip. Some, the very brave indeed, even call him Liesmith, even though that isn't entirely true either. And here we conclude our tale. For the children at heart, if you liked this, please follow the channel and find Hrafnarfjall Hearthside on Facebook. Don't forget to check out our Patreon haul here on Midgard or our Fundly. The links are in the comments. See you there.